Gentlemen, I would like to discuss the quote unquote TikTok ban. I would like your opinions on this, as well as, but there's a little bit of run over into the market pricing with Meta and whatnot. But for now, let me just set the premise. Wednesday, the House approved 352 to 65, the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversaries Controlled Application Act. First of all, the name alone makes me feel good. It makes me feel safe. And I just want that to be known and on the record. The bill calls for ByteDance to divest TikTok, or it will be effectively banned in the United States. It gives them 6 months to divest out of the U.S. business, which has about 150 million users. TikTok says over 5 million U.S. businesses are utilizing this thing right now. The U.S. or those that have introduced the bill have said TikTok is a threat to national security because it's controlled by a foreign adversary. There's a few other things I'd like to say here, but I just wanted to lay the premise. Tom, you may be one of their most active users over the last 6 months. So I am very curious to get your opinion on whether or not this thing should, or whether or not you think we are taking the correct approach in addressing a national security threat should one exist here.
Well, okay. I don't think this is going to surprise you or anybody else, but this is ridiculous in my mind. First of all, I don't like TikTok. I love TikTok. I think it's the best social.
How do you love something that's not? He can't give you any love back. It's just social media.
I think it's the best social app that there is by far, hands down. Nothing else is even close. But what's interesting to me, a couple things. If this was 1999, okay, would this same bunch of politicians be talking about, or 1998, would we be talking about banning the internet maybe? You know,
they just had no idea how big it was going to be, or they would have.
I mean, just like that's like I'm just starting to worry. Like I'm tying everything in here, like AI along with the internet. Like, you know, I mean, there was legislation passed in other countries where they're putting, yesterday in the UK, where they're putting fences around AI. You know, just go back, 20 some odd years. Will we have banned the internet? I mean, also when you're talking about TikTok and you're talking about the you're talking about a bunch of politicians. I trust those politicians far less with respect to what comes out of their mouth than I'm worried about, a Chinese overlord. I mean, what do you want to call it? I think it's a little bit ridiculous. I don't buy anything through TikTok. I haven't spent any money through TikTok. I don't care if TikTok's able to somehow know what I watch for, what I like to watch for an extra 2 seconds as opposed to something else. Yeah. I mean, I think it's so ridiculous.
Don't use it if you feel that way.
Here's my problem with it. My problem with it is we have so many issues with integrity and just and I have so many fears about risks we have to our own democracy from our own politicians because of their unwillingness to be honest, to have reasonable ethics. I mean, there's so many things that scare me about politicians, and yet somehow they can come together on a bipartisan agreement because nobody wants to go back to their constituents with bad optics and agree to get rid of TikTok because they don't use it. TikTok really helps a lot of small businesses. Kids love it. I mean, what's not to love?
Victor, what's your stance on this?
So I think it's a little, I understand. So there's two issues here. One, national security and just what messages are getting floated to the top and what messages are perhaps not being surfaced to people. I do think there's something to be said with the idea that we are not, when I say we, Americans, American businesses, in particular, American social media companies are not allowed in China. And also, what messages are surfaces in China are highly controlled. They're messages of national pride. They're messages around, Chinese history, and there's also sort of rules and restrictions on how much of that stuff people can consume. And I know that's not necessarily something that people are going to have the appetite here in America to say, hey, kids can't watch more than 2 hours of this stuff at a time, or they can only play video games on the weekends. Nobody in America is going to go for that. But I think there's something to be said of who's controlling that message and how important it is.
Okay.
150 million pairs of eyeballs are looking at messages. Now hold on, because I'm going to come back to where you are. The second thing is, who owns the data? Who owns the data of the messages, the videos that you're sharing, your location, some of your personal, your PII? There are rules to how we protect that information here in America, and I think we should have rules of the road for how companies are managing that data and what safety and protocols are being put in place so that people can have peace of mind. Now, here's where I come back to sort of agreeing with you, which is, I think picking winners and losers in the way that we are picking winners and losers here is a slippery slope. Today, sure, are we in economic sort of competition with China? Of course. Are they approaching us in terms of their economic output being equivalent in a way that we have never had since post World War II? Yes. Should we be careful about the precedents that we set? Yes, I believe we should. Should we instead say, what are the rules of the road? Not just for ByteDance or for Chinese adversary companies, but for our own. We still have Section 230 that we have not necessarily addressed, and Zuckerberg was just in front of Senate for the 5th or 6th time addressing privacy concerns. If we want to address these issues, why not come up with rules of the road that address how to protect people's data, how to improve the messaging that goes out to everybody? Why not, instead of picking the winners and the losers, allowing Steve Mnuchin and his slush fund to come in here and likely make a decent offer for TikTok, make general rules of the road that everybody can agree to conform to. And I don't know if maybe that's a little kumbaya or pie in the sky, but don't you think we're in a slippery slope, Tom, if we're in the business of picking winners and losers?
I think you are correct, but I think that more importantly, you started off with what bothers me the most. If these politicians wanted to say, listen, it's not about some security risk. If the politicians want to say, listen, this is really simple. This is not going to be a one-sided relationship. Meaning, if you're going to ban our social media apps, then we are going to ban your social media apps unless you divest. Just be honest. This is another big issue I have. Just tell it like it is. If you want this to be tit for tat or whatever it is, then we're, you do this to us, we're going to do this to you, and then that's the way it's going to be. And so until you open up and everything's fair and basically it's two-sided, every trade is two-sided, then this is the stuff we're going to do. But don't make it like, hey, we're doing this to protect you. Don't make this into some kind of political grandstand where you're just saying, you know what, we're protecting you so the Chinese don't know that you're shopping at Costco on Saturday. This really bothers me that we made this into, we're doing this to protect you because the optics around that are all politically motivated. Do it because, hey, you know what, this is, if you have to do it and you want to make a statement, listen, if you're going to ban us doing business in China, then we're going to ban you doing business here. But do not make this into we're doing this to protect you. I don't want a bunch of politicians that have never used certain social media apps to protect my best interests. That's what bothers me.
I wonder then, so this is passed the House. Of course, this goes to the Senate next, and we shall see how far this goes, whether it makes it past the Senate or not. The potential question, not necessarily for you, but the next step, if, let's imagine this passes Senate, you find yourself in a potential tit-for-tat situation. If you're if we are actually going to make a move that will effectively, if they don't divest, it will ban the app within 6 months, headed into the election, go figure. The potential for retaliation. Do we find ourselves back in sort of this tit for tat world where we raise tariffs on one thing, China responds in another
Yeah.
way? Are we potentially finding ourselves headed down that same slippery slope going into an election year where we're going to see some back and forth in the same ways we did back in 2016?
Well, it was disaster last time, and so I really hope we don't go there. I mean, it was a complete screw up by the previous Trump administration, and it was a disaster. So I really hope we don't go that direction, because having open trade, especially in 2024, now we'll give a pass for 2016 because 8 years ago markets move, and it's very different in 2024 than it was in 2016, just because of how far we've come technology-wise and how far we've come in decentralized space and everything else. But you cannot, in 2024, shut down. You cannot shut down trade. You cannot be, you cannot isolate yourself. And if China wants to make that mistake, okay, let them make that mistake. But we cannot make that mistake. And I hope our politicians understand that.
I think the revenue is somewhere, but the ad revenue of TikTok is somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 billion, maybe give or take 1 or 2 billion.
Yeah.
So in other words, if companies aren't going to be spending that $6 billion, I'm going to go a little bit fundamental. You tell me if this is all worthless, but $6 billion has to go potentially somewhere. If a marketer at a firm has to spread out their advertising budgets, they're currently thinking of TikTok as one of the platforms that's got 150 younger eyeballs. So we're going to target there. That $6 billion has to be spread across somewhere. And I think on the anticipation that this could actually go somewhere, you saw a little bit of a bid, nothing too crazy, in Meta and some of the other social media companies. Can I ask you, for all of the media attention that this is going to get this week, and likely until you get some resolution with the Senate, do you find that this is tradable in any way? Do you find that these advertising dollars could potentially find their way to Snap, find their way to Meta? It doesn't seem like it's necessarily raising volatility in any of those names, but there's the potential, the revenue dollars going there. Do you find this is actually tradable in any way, or do you say, this is an interesting political discussion, but be careful about thinking that this news item is actually actionable?
I don't think it's actionable, because TikTok is not. They're not going to walk away from. I mean, it's just business. At some point, it's just business. They're going to fight it as much as they can, and then they're just going to do a deal. And hopefully, it's not like it's not something. Hopefully, it's actually an auction marketplace if they have to do a deal. TikTok is really valuable for a lot of small businesses in America. The economy will be hurt way worse if you don't have a lot of money.
You keep going to that. I mean, there are other social media sites.
I know, but they're not nearly as good.
Use that are as popular as, like, my son is not going to. Like, I'm not on TikTok. My son's on TikTok.
Yeah.
He's not going to support a small business because he's watching TikTok.
I will.
He uses it for a completely different reason.
But I will. I mean, whether
the
it's
world doesn't evolve around Tom. I'm
no, I understand that, but I'm
kind of like Victor. I'm half on your side. I'm half.
I see.
Well, let me use it. Let me use a different angle. Just one that maybe hits a little bit more home.
Okay.
So we have a war between Israel and Palestine right now, and there are some that say that a lot, because China's more on the Palestinian side than the Israeli side, that you get a lot more propaganda on TikTok with the Palestinian point of view than you would. They suppress the Israeli point of view. Now you're looking at something where the U.S. supports more the Israeli point of view than it does the Palestinian point of view, and you're getting a little bit of an undertone of maybe manipulating the news that people get and possibly their opinions. What do you think about that?
What I think about that is that whoever told you that is just skewing whatever their own bias is. Because as somebody who's on TikTok, I don't see any of that bias. I just don't see any bias. And what I do see TikTok doing is there's probably about 50 or 100 different restaurants and different foods and different things in Chicago that I've seen over the last couple of years that I've actually spent money on, tried out. And TikTok is huge to the U.S. economy. Now, listen, it's going to trade. If they're forced to sell, they'll sell it. That's why these other stocks aren't going to be That's why it's not going to make that much difference, and there's not some play here. But I think that the general message between AI, let's be careful about putting fences up around AI because, again, we don't know enough yet to start fencing it in. Just like we don't like the fences that we put up around decentralization and crypto and everything else. It's been a disaster. Let's worry about the same stuff, and let's be careful with social media apps and all of a sudden trying to play God or whatever else it is. If it's one for one, okay, I can understand that. But if there's something else and it's personal or it's just a political narrative so that you have a really good talking point, which you think is a good talking point when you sit in front of a town hall next year in an election in November, then or later this year in election November, and you think that's a talking point that's going to help you, I think you're crazy. And I think it's a big mistake.
I think there's a time for incremental politics, incremental legislation, and there's time for, maybe major reform. And I'm not calling for major reform here, but I do think the year is 2024, and with Cambridge Analytica, with now approaching national security threat with a foreign adversary, I think rather than picking the winners and losers, it's time to create rules for the road that are transparent, that both the users and the companies and governments can all coalesce around, versus a few months out for the election, banning TikTok. This has been a potential ever since the Trump administration, and we haven't done anything about it. And to do it 6 months into the election, or to do it within 6 months, which will land just prior to the election, it doesn't give, in my personal opinion, it doesn't give people the right taste in their mouth. It lends for people to think it's being done for the wrong reasons.
I think it's an overreach. I think the term is overreach, and I think it's an overreach. That's all. Look, we have real problems. We have real problems in this country, okay? TikTok is not one of them. That's my biggest issue. Like, it takes the focus off some of the real issues that are in front of, Americans, voters, and everything else. The issue should not come down to whether or not to ban TikTok. That is not a great accomplishment by, both houses of our government. That we have, that's very bothersome to me. That all of a sudden we're getting this kind of, we're almost being distracted by this, and it's bothersome.
You're being distracted by the food.
Can I say that? Can I say this real quick?
Maybe.
I am also in solidarity with Tony. I am not on TikTok either, and I have a message for the young people. Go buy physical books. Read physical books. And it doesn't even matter if it's TikTok, Instagram, or you pick it. Delete that ish off your phone and go buy some physical books, everybody. And tomorrow will be much brighter, I promise you.
Tony and I want to know if magazines count.
What about picture books? Are picture books count too?
I bet you still got a National Geographic subscription, don't you, Tom?
I don't, but I should consider it maybe.
Gentlemen, it was fun.